Welcome to From Pumps to Power Moves. I'm your host, Claudia Williams. This is where we stop waiting for someday and start making intentional moves today. We're diving into the strategies that turn ambition into action and influence into impact. Whether you're climbing the ladder or building your own path, this is your space to step into what's next and own it. Hi, and welcome to another episode. Today we're going behind the curtain with a man who would describe himself as having a moment of courage fueled by naivete. He's lived on 6 different continents, having been born in South Africa and landed in all places, Chicago in the US. He is an expert in the area of performance habits and especially teaching revenue facing individuals, revenue generating individuals and organizations. He's a professor at the Northwestern Kellogg School of Management. He's a performance poet and a writer of poetry and has published a book of poems. So many interesting things we can dive into: the work he does with organizations, his own entrepreneurship, and the impact he has on revenue and business outcomes. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by Andrew Sykes. Andrew, thank you for joining me.
It's my privilege. Thank you for inviting me.
I mean, we might have to talk about your choices at some point. I understand that is where Kellogg is located, and your opportunity to be a professor there is compelling. We can start there. So talk a little bit about being a professor in one of the most prestigious business schools.
Yeah, it really is such a privilege to teach at Kellogg because it brings together so many really wickedly smart people as students, participants, as professors. And so to be part of that community feels like you're constantly in school, learning and developing. And as a professor, I get to enjoy the privilege of performing, teaching, facilitating. Teaching for me is one of those arts that brings together storytelling, facilitation, questions, and listening. Many of the skills that I teach are required to be an effective professor. So it's a fun, I wouldn't say it's my main gig, but it's a fun part of my portfolio career.
And I love how you described it as being an effective professor, because there are a lot of professors and there are fewer really excellent ones. And I imagine because of the work you do and what you bring to the classroom, it makes you a very excellent professor. So the work you do, let's dive in and talk about how you came to be an expert in the area of habits, performance habits.
Yes. Well, you mentioned earlier that I've made some choices in my life, one of which was to start my own business at age 21, which I would describe as a triumph of courage over wisdom, because I thought that having a degree in actuarial science was sufficient to run a healthcare and actuarial consulting practice. As it turns out, it wasn't, because I was lacking the skills of sales and leadership and all the other things you need to run and grow a. And I had a chairman at the time who was one of those people who I used to describe as a natural salesperson. I no longer do that for reasons I'll explain shortly. But I would ask him, how do you do what you do? And he didn't have a great answer to the question. And so I got fascinated by the idea of these skills that some people seem to have and others don't, particularly me, and how you might go about acquiring them and doing so in record time. And that in the end led to a choice to come to America to start a wellness consulting practice. A second example of naivety over wisdom, I expected to find in America the answer to the question how wellness should be done well. Instead, I found the answer of all the ways in which it can be done badly. And so I did what anyone I think in that circumstance would do. I started a behavioral research lab, gathered together many clever researchers to answer the question, how do people actually acquire skills and habits and quit the bad ones? And which ones really matter to our performance in life and work? And what's it all worth to people and to organizations in the end? And that research completely changed my life, our business, and how I teach and learn today.
And and was that the BRAT Lab?
Yes, the Behavioral Research Applied Technology Laboratory. So, an acronym, but also a little tongue in cheek because I was a smoker from
Wow.
age 6 when I had my first cigarette. My brother, Greg, 4 years older, I caught him smoking around the back of the house, and he, a quick thinking kid, offered me a puff. And I grew up in a time where tobacco advertising was everywhere. So that was my first exposure. But all through learning about actuarial science, what kills you and what makes you sick, and running a health practice, I continued to smoke. So I was really confronted by how apparently someone smart enough to know that this habit is bad for them wasn't able to do something about it effectively. And that got me curious about this knowing doing gap that we all face.
Yes.
I like to describe that as, like my kids. Sometimes they know what to do and they do the opposite. We do the same as adults. You would describe that as bratish behavior, hence BRAT Lab.
Love it. And you said something very important as you began your story. Degree in actuarial science, yet didn't know, and a lot of young people going into professional careers don't understand the role that sales and eh, the relationship driving performance based skills they need to have to be successful in their professional careers. I learned that as a law student or as a legal professional, didn't understand how much of my job was sales, right? And so you left to figure out, and they don't teach you that in school, and the people who are doing it don't know how to teach you that. I love that you asked, and it was kind of like, I don't know. So then where do you go from there? You're learning, you're studying behavioral science, you're in the laboratory. Then what do you do? What do you do with what you're learning?
A couple of things. One, I started Habits at Work, which is a company that helps leaders and revenue facing professionals to turn knowledge into skills through the science of intentional and deliberate practice, and then skills into habits. And that distinction has been completely life changing for me because I used to believe what many people say, that knowledge is power. I no longer believe that.
Mhm.
Especially in a world where there's an abundance of knowledge, it's no longer a competitive advantage. What is the ability to take that knowledge and embody it as a skill. And then having the skill is wonderful, but if you don't actually practice the right skill at the right time habitually, what's the point of having the skill? So I've come to believe that knowledge is wonderful, but performance is a function of practicing or not the right habits at the right time for the right reason. And if you can't bridge that gap from knowledge to habits, you may be the smartest person in the room. You're also likely to be one of the least effective as a result. And curiously, I became a yoga teacher a couple of years ago. I learned more about teaching embodied skills by becoming a yoga teacher than I had as a decade as a professor or a facilitator for 3 decades. It really came home to me, like leadership and sales and so much of being effective in business is an embodiment of communication and action skills, like how you tell stories, how you ask questions, how you lead a conversation. And those require some knowledge, of course, but it's the practice and the embodiment of it that makes the difference.
And then how do you take what's your approach to going from skill to habit to performance? How are you connecting the dots?
Well, we do start with knowledge because you need to know what excellence looks like, what
Mhm.
bad looks like, the frameworks that might make it easy for you, common traps and expert moves. So there is a body of knowledge behind every skill.
Okay.
But human beings have this nasty habit of understanding something and saying to themselves, yeah, I get that. I've got this. And we pretend to ourselves that understanding something equals being good at it.
Mm.
It's not by far.
Mhm.
So the art of turning knowledge into skills is deliberate practice. And if you think of any domain like chess or sports or professional driving, everything, frankly, except work, this rule is true. The better you get, the more you practice. The better you get, the more coaches you have. In business, we have this word experience, which we use to pretend to ourselves that if I just do something over and over again for long enough, I'll get really great at it. And then at some point, I don't have to practice anymore because I'm good enough. And it is, for me, so clear that mere experience gained on automatic is the enemy of mastery. Deliberate practice, which is very uncommon in business, is the genesis of genius. So when I see someone like my chairman previously, who I thought was naturally good, I now know there's no such thing. I'm of the view that every skill of every person, genius or not, was built and not born. But deliberate practice is a very particular type of practice. And in most training programs in corporations, practice is absent, or when it's present, it's here's a framework, try it once, maybe there's a little bit of feedback. That's something, but what it's not is deliberate practice, because one of the rules I think is very true is deliberate practice requires at least 3 repetitions in any practice session. Otherwise, how do you go from I try it out, I get feedback? If you don't put that feedback in practice right then and there, how do you know if the feedback has sunk in? And I found that a 3 rep minimum rule is the heart of deliberate practice. And then there's a whole other topic about how we turn skills into habits. You alluded to it when we were chatting before the show about
Yeah.
the golden rules of creating habits that themselves came out of BRAT Lab and have been, for me at least, profound and mind blowing because they're common sense when you hear them, but far from common practice.
Okay. I have a bunch of questions. So the first question is creating the skill, developing the skill. And then I'll go from the question on skill to habit. Example, and I want to see if I'm thinking about this the right way. I was working with a client last year, and we're rolling out a major change in the organization. And the executive team is preparing a presentation to roll out this change as part of the communication plan. And so I said to everyone, okay, where everyone has their parts, said we need to do a run of show. So everyone, I need you to go home. I need you to practice your part. I want you to get on Microsoft Teams. I want you to record yourself saying your part. I want you to watch your recording. I want you to see, first of all, how long is it taking you? Do you know how long it takes you to go through each of these slides? I want you to see what you look like, how you're showing up, because it was going to be done virtually. How do you think people are going to perceive you? And everyone kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, because then we're going to come here in the group and you're going to do a complete run of show. So you need to have the timing down. You need to be able to know how you're going to pass the baton to each other, all this stuff. So that when we go live, you look, it's polished, it's smooth. And I mean, Claudia, we know what we're talking about. I mean, we've been at this for a year putting this all together. We know what we're talking about. Do we really need to practice?
Yeah,
And I said, yes, you know what you're talking about. What you don't know is how to present it. And yes, I said, I deliver workshops. I don't go to a workshop without having practiced my workshop. So I know how it's going to, and where I'm going to get tripped up or what's the tone I want to use. And I've been doing this for 20 years. So yes, you need to practice it.
yeah,
They learned. They, so a couple of them learned the hard way and came back after and said, "You're right. Probably should have practiced that."
yeah.
Right? So that's the kind of thing where yes, you might know something, but now you're in a different space with it. Is that the kind of thing where that's the practice?
That is the practice. And you pointed to so many beautiful examples of what gets in the way. The first of which is the more you know a subject, the more likely you are to lose other people because you've got so much background knowledge. The skill of simply and effectively and evocatively explaining something to somebody is independent of the knowledge. So being smart in a subject doesn't mean in any way, in fact, probably is negatively proportional to how effectively you can communicate it, which is why some of the best teachers I've found are people who struggled to acquire the skill. They didn't find it easy, and they had to deconstruct what it looks like to be good at it. You also pointed to, practice, and one of the myths in business is that performance and practice are the same thing. So last week I had 12 meetings. None of them were actually practicing the skill of running an effective meeting. I was performing. And can you get feedback and improve by performing a particular skill? Of course, but it's different from practice. The mindset, the way you go about it, the 3-rep practice, you don't do that when you're performing, you do it once. And you think about a theater show, they don't do one dress rehearsal and then go live the next day. They're practicing for months, and they break down every scene into tiny little pieces, as small as, for example, a hand movement or a gesture or a stage position. And the same is true in business skills. And most people say, well, who's got the time to practice? We've got so much to do. And my response is either find the time to practice, or you will need the time to clean up the mess you make.
I just want to pause there for a minute and uh, think about the impact of what you just said, that you can put in a little bit of time on the front end or volumes of time on the back end.
And a lot has to do with what you said about trust. Trust is an asymmetric phenomenon. Kevin Plank said, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. So if a little bit of practice allows you to show up in a way that builds trust, it saves you an awful amount of time. If you blow a first impression or a presentation, climbing out of a trust hole can be a multi-month phenomenon if you're even given the chance to do so.
We've talked before, and you've described trustworthiness as a skill. And so how do you develop trustworthiness as a skill? And
I
there are a lot of mixed feelings about trust, right? Some people say, no, you have to earn my trust. Other people say, I start from a position of saying, you have my trust. What is trustworthiness as a skill?
Yes. Firstly, I would say it is not a skill. There are many skills that each on their own can grow trust if done well, or destroy or tarnish trust if done badly. They include things like making a great first impression, how you tell stories, how you ask questions, how you listen empathically rather than actively, how you plan and prioritize your life. So when you make promises, you do so with integrity. But I think the big distinction that really changed my view on trust is there's a set of skills that make you worthy of trust in the obvious sense. You're honest, you do what you say you're going to do, you keep your promises, and you have good intentions towards other people. And if you have those things, I would say you are a person of integrity and you deserve all the trust in the world, and you would get it if the world was fair. As it turns out, trustworthiness is a judgment that other people make about you, often based on false signals, typically in the first milliseconds to minutes when they first meet you, and based on tiny signals over time. So there is a second whole category of skills, which is the skills that make it easy for other people to judge you as trustworthy, so you earn the right to actually show that you are. And if you think about it from one point of view, con men and women have the skill of building trust without the integrity behind it. And many professionals have all the integrity, but lack the skills of being able to demonstrate or create a high trust impression. But you put those two things together, someone who has the character of integrity and the skills of being judged as trustworthy, you're unstoppable.
Can you give us an example of someone?
I think there are many people who we just feel extraordinary around, because I would
Mhm,
say trust and love,
mhm.
platonic, or romantic sense are very, very close. When you think
Mhm.
about the people you love in life, how many people do you love and not trust? Now, trust is domain specific, so you may love, a spouse, but not trust them to do your taxes for you. But by and large, we love being around people who we feel we can trust because we feel they've got our back. Loyalty is important to most people. And so I think it's really worth thinking about this as we've got a set of professional skills
Mhm.
that we hope to be paid for having, but that no one values those things without looking at them through the lens of who they think you are. And if that lens or that impression is suboptimal, it's a little like if I make you a promise for $10 million next Thursday, but you trust me 1%, you're going to discount my promise by that percentage that you trust me. So for many people, they're frustrated by being really integrous people and somehow not being that effective as leaders, as salespeople, or as humans in a relationship. And it's very often these trustworthiness judgment skills that are missing. And one example I often ask people is, do you believe that creating a high trust first impression is a skill? Everyone I've asked says, yes, of course. I say, do you believe that skills are developed through practice, ideally with a coach? Yes, of course. Okay, then how many minutes in the last decade have you spent working on your high trust first impression? And most people's answer is zero. So you get what you get. And I say, if you're not in action on developing your trustworthiness skills, what you're signing up for is being unfairly judged as untrustworthy. Why would you do that to yourself?
What's something someone can do to create that high trustworthiness first impression?
Yeah. Many of the things you would say are completely obvious. I would just note that they're not common practice, although they're common sense. Things like greeting someone with a smile and appropriate eye contact for the culture you're in, a firm handshake, and open body posture. And some of these things are not honest
Mhm.
signals of trustworthiness, but they are signals that people use.
Mhm.
And then, of course, how you make small talk, how you introduce your name, how good you are at remembering other people's names, how often you use people's names. And those are all skills. People say, I'm bad at names as if they've got a bad memory. My response is nonsense. You've got a great memory. You have bad technique when it comes to hearing and using someone's name so you remember it. And then the gem of a first impression is how you answer that question that someone like me annoyingly always asks, which is, tell me a little bit about yourself. And most people do a resume dump that is in the best day concise, on their worst day long and waffling and boring, and often very, very detailed on how competent someone is and their track record. And no one cares about those things until they've decided that you're sincere. Sincerity is a judgment of who are you, character, and what do you want, motive. So I recommend people share an introduction that's just a very brief 3 sentence story about who they are and why they do what they do. As an example, if you were being operated on by a surgeon tomorrow,
Mhm.
Surgeon A could say, well, I do this procedure thousands of times a year. I get paid a lot of money for being really good at it. I get fantastic clinical outcomes. I can't wait to cut you open tomorrow. Or Surgeon B might share, when I was 10 years old, my older brother died from this disease. And I promised myself no other family would suffer this loss. I've done this procedure many times. I get fantastic outcomes. I can't wait to work with you tomorrow. Who would you prefer?
Yeah,
Most
I'd
people
take
say that, yeah, the
I'd
second
take
one,
B every single time.
because we
Mhm.
trust motive that is other focused and we mistrust. This is why salespeople have such a bad reputation. It's not because they lack integrity, it's because we assume that they're doing what they're doing to earn a commission. Whereas nurses and doctors do what they do because they want to save lives. They both get
Mhm.
paid, but the reputation impact based on society's view of why you do what you do can be devastating or phenomenal. As an example, in my own life, in the morning, I can be leading a yoga class, then teaching a course at Kellogg where I'm a trusted professor, then on a sales meeting where I get treated like a salesperson, and then I go and do a performance poetry show in the evening. And it's the same human, but how I'm judged as trustworthy or not is completely different. So, given that that's the weirdness of how trust works, why wouldn't one want to learn how to design their first impression to earn trust in minutes that would otherwise take months?
Okay. Skills to habits.
Okay.
I grew up my father taught me how to play golf when I was 10 years old. One of the things he wanted me to do was to have a golf club next to the side of my bed. And he would say, I just every time, as many times as you can, as he was teaching me to learn how to grip the club, as many times as you can, I want you to just pick up the club and grip it. And this is how I want you to grip it. And the more times you do this during a day and the more times you do it in a week and a month, it's just going to be a habit for you to grip it the right way. And so, and that in turn improved my skill of the game. And so I thought that's how he taught me. So how does the skill form the help shape the good habits?
Yeah, great question. And golf is a wonderful metaphor or example for this work because most of us have been taught if at first you don't succeed, try and try again.
Mhm.
You're not getting it right, well, just try harder, do more
Mhm.
reps. And there is a value in repetition, but much lower than we expect, versus
Right.
doing fewer reps with a lot of intentional mindset towards getting better and a coach present who can point out what to do differently. Because in every skill, we hit plateaus, and those plateaus can last a month or several years. But the key to busting a plateau in skill development is having someone else watch you to see the things that you can't see because they're in your blind spot. So it sounds like your dad was a good coach. He wanted you to get the reps, but also
Right.
did what we know is the essence of skill development, which is you can't practice a golf swing and get good at swinging a golf club. You have to practice the grip. Then you have to practice where you plant your feet. Then you have
Mhm.
to practice what you do with your head. I'm not a golfer, so forgive me if I'm getting it a little wrong, but
No,
you have to
yeah.
break down these compound skills into the little pieces, the smaller the better. And that leads into what we learned about skills turning into habits. The first golden rule is human beings cannot create more than one habit at a time. And think about what we do in business. It's the new year. So here are the 17 things we'd like you to do this year. Good luck. And that's about as effective as waking up on New Year's Day with a hangover, promising this is the year I'm going to learn Spanish and get fit and learn to scuba dive. Most people fail New Year's resolutions because they take on more than one thing. And when people hear that, they say, well, hey, that kind of sounds obvious, but I've got so much to do. I have to tackle them simultaneously. And I would say there's two people. Person one tries to attack four habits at the same time. They'll try and fail all year and get nowhere. Person B tackles one habit for quarter one habit for quarter two, etc. By the end of the year, they'll have four new habits, and person A will still be stuck and frustrated, having given up on themselves and said, I'm just not the kind of person who can do this. So that one I think is pretty obvious. It's not a law of the universe, but it is practically so. You can only create one new habit at a time.
Okay. What do you do if something in the business has radically changed or you are promoted into a new position? So your job is really different and you've gone from really working at a detailed level and now you have to play at a much more strategic level. And so how you go about working changes. That's a lot of change. in a short period of time. Presumably, you've been trained and developed along the way, but a lot of people aren't. This is where I see failure in the transition in the role because they're not ready. So, short of doing the right thing, which is training and developing people along the way, what can what can leaders do from the performance habits space to help that transition be more successful?
Yeah. The first thing is to write down what are all the new skills that I think I will need to be successful. As, for example, in a transition from an individual contributor to a manager,
Hmm.
I need the skills of planning, of coaching, of giving feedback, of setting goals, etc. Then I would rank all of those skills based on how much of an impact I think each would give. And I would cross out everything from 2 through 50 on my list and just focus on the single most pivotal, like the first domino skill until I've got that nailed. For what it's worth, for managers, that skill is almost always giving feedback.
Hmm.
And then, a quarter later, you can tackle number 2 and number 3. But you will get much further faster by sequencing your skill development than by trying to do everything at the same time. It's overwhelming, exhausting, and you'll do it badly anyway.
Hmm.
Same thing as you go from management into leadership. I would ask, what is the essential skill that will make the biggest difference? For my money, it is often the skill of telling stories, because leaders' job is to lead people into the future. The future is nothing but a story of possibility. And the better
Hmm.
you are at telling stories, the more you inspire people to take the matching actions to create the future you see. So, but there are the leadership skills, of course. Just put them 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and get to them after you've developed the first one. I would say not just to a sufficient level, but to as good as you can get in 3 months. And then you can go to the second one.
Okay. And it isn't about being perfect at it, right? It's about being good enough, and you can continue that journey, but it's about focusing and shifting your focus to working on that next skill.
Yes. And being careful of what good enough really is. Because, for example, being able to drive to work without causing an accident is a sufficiently good level of driving skills,
Hmm.
unless you choose to be a professional driver, in which case it's horrendous. So you don't have to be fantastic at everything, but if you
Hmm.
are in a position as a manager or a salesperson or a leader, there are a few skills at which I believe you need to be in the top 1% or 0.1%.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is, this 10,000 hour rule, made popular by Malcolm Gladwell and others,
Yep. Yep.
is absolute nonsense. Yes, spending 10,000 hours on a skill can make you perhaps one of the top 10 in the world. However, 10,000 hours is an hour a day for 27 years. Good luck with that.
Hmm.
What our research has shown is, in a matter of 3 months, you can go from a standing start in almost any skill to being the first out of a group of 10,000 people on average. And that is phenomenal
That's remarkable.
position, but you have to do it in a particular way. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it does require a coach, the right mindset, the right feedback model. Showing up is half the skill, making sure what you do in your practice is the other.
And you keep talking about, you keep referring to a coach, and you've mentioned a coach over and over again. I'm biased because I'm a coach, but it blows my mind a little bit. There are executives and leaders who see working with a coach as punitive, or something that makes them feel like they are just not good enough. And when they're afforded an opportunity to work with a coach, it's an ego slam. It hurts their ego.
Yeah,
And could talk about, I mean, from my perspective, I try to make an analogy to sports. The best athletes work with coaches. They always have, they always will. They never hit a point where they say, "Thanks, I've got this. I'm on my own now."
yeah.
What is it about business and leadership that people might sit back and say, I don't need a coach for my skills in business.
Yeah, I think it's many things. Ego is one of them. The other is the myth of the value of experience. I mean, we've all met people with 30 years experience that are just not that good. So
Hmm.
clearly, doing the same thing over and over isn't the recipe for being phenomenal. And the research backs that up. There is a recipe for getting good at getting great at anything, and it is not simply repetition and gaining experience. I'm not denying the value of experience, but it's not the way to be phenomenal at a skill. I do think the other aspect is sometimes cynically people get promoted to the level of their incompetence and they're worried that they'll be exposed by having a coach who will see what the gaps are. But my view is I would rather have someone point out my blind spots than go through life being blind and making a fool of myself or being less than effective just because I didn't want to get some feedback that stung. And speaking of coaches, if I hire a coach and they don't give me feedback that sometimes, or preferably often, stings, I find a new coach because I don't need to be told what I'm doing well. Although I will say, if you want to be good, work on your weaknesses, and you want to be great, work on your strengths. So a good coach will help you amplify your strengths.
Hmm.
But also point to the things that you probably don't want to hear, but you really need to hear.
Let's talk about you for a little bit now. So you go from South Africa to America, you've moved multiple continents. What did you learn from all of your moves?
That moving country and city and culture is an extraordinary opportunity for reinvention.
Mhm.
It's also the fast path to cross cultural understanding because you very quickly go bankrupt if you assume that the way you grew up is going to work in a new culture. And I've learned the hard way about trying to rush to the details in Brazil when 45 minutes of catching up is required, or making eye contact in the Middle East where it can be seen as an invitation to intimacy or rude. And it's these tiny little inflections of your way of being that make a world of difference. And what I've found personally is the joy of realizing how much people are just people wherever you go, but that these layers of things we call culture are just skills you can acquire as you move from one culture to the next. I say this to my kids often. My best advice from my 54 years on this planet is always be foreign. You get to see things that people in the culture don't see, and you're constantly challenged to figure out how to fit in and make a contribution. And what a crucible for growth that is.
It's very powerful. And it says a lot too about people who move from organization to organization too. And the things that we need to let go of when we leave one organization and move into another organization, and the things that organization needs to recognize and value in the people they're bringing in from another culture.
Yes. And if you don't mind me adding in, I would also say we should be very respectful of the PhD in management science that many women get when they choose to go home and care for kids, or men for that matter. But
Thank
I'm
you.
frustrated by the view that taking time to look after kids is extracting yourself from work that leaves you behind. Show me someone who can manage two toddlers fighting, and I'll show you someone who can run an effective executive meeting.
Thank you very much. As someone who took a couple of years off to stay home and raise babies and run around with toddlers, I appreciate that. And I've worked alongside friends who really struggled to get back into the workforce after taking much more time off than I did. And I I assess people. I understand how qualified and capable they were, and it was a struggle just to get back into the workforce. So I appreciate that very much.
I
You
didn't
meant
mention rules 2 and 3 of creating habits, so I don't want to leave you or your
go, go. Yes.
rule number 2. Golden rule number 2 is you can't create a new habit until you have extinguished an existing habit that occupies the same time and space in your day. Classic business strategy is, please take on these 5 new tasks. By the way, we're taking nothing off your desk. And then we
Mhm.
wonder why people are burned out.
Mhm.
So if someone says, for example, I want to learn to play golf, and I said, when do you want to play golf? And you said, 6 a.m., I'm a morning person. I said, okay, that's wonderful. What are you going to give up to create the space? And you said, binge watching Netflix. When do you watch Netflix? At night. It just doesn't work.
Mhm.
Our day is like a garden of habits, good ones like roses, bad ones like weeds, but it's fully grown. If you want to create a new habit, you have to pull something out so there's a place to grow the new one. And I think when people hear that, they can sort of see the sense in that. The third one, though, is the one that blew my mind, and it's my favorite thing to say. Golden rule number 3 is human beings don't have habits. Habits have human beings. By which we mean, it's not just a cute turn of phrase, which I think it is.
Mhm.
You walk into a library, you'll be quiet. You walk into a bar, you're likely to be more talkative, louder, and tell stories. The
Mhm.
behavior is encoded in the environment or the contexts in which you find yourself. So when we're struggling to create a habit, we usually say, I didn't have enough willpower. I'm not the kind of person who can do this. And we blame ourselves, or in organizations, we blame employees. And I have evidence that we blame employees because the
Mhm.
number 1 and number 2 strategy for changing employees' behavior is incentives and training. The assumption below that must be you're not motivated or you're stupid or you just lack the skill. Training's wonderful, but more often than not, people don't practice the habits because the environment around them, the physical spaces, the systems, the people, and their mindsets encode some other habit. So workplace design and culture change ends up simply being a project in changing habits at scale. And there is a science we developed called context design, which is how do you design the world around your leadership team, your employees, or your customers so the habits you want them to practice become the easy default and not the difficult choice. It
Let's dive
completely changed my view on how to create habits.
let's dive into an example of this a little bit. So, a typical sales organization. Sales rewards outcomes. And if you want to change the behaviors of sales professionals, so something about their customer base changes, something about the business model changes, and we need to change. We want them to change. Oh, we want them to be more strategic with their time. We want to change behaviors, but the rewards, the incentives, the compensation model stays exactly the same. How do we get salespeople to change how they work, how they think about their budget, how they invest in their client relationships differently, how they just go from meeting to meeting, send themselves a note, I'm going to follow up with Joe on Wednesday, boom boom boom, all this typical stuff, because the only thing that matters is how much money they make at the end of it, right? So when we know if we can change their behaviors, there will be more money, but they know I've been doing this. This is the right. So we're rewarding this, but we want to change, rewarding B when we really want to change A. So what do you do?
Well, first, to your point, financial incentives turn out to be the most expensive and least effective way to change behavior. I'm not against sales commissions because they immunize the company against the risk of performance or otherwise.
Yes.
But as a strategy for changing behavior, they lack power
Thank you.
compared to something like feedback or daily recognition. Because as it turns out, we're more compelled to act by the release of dopamine than we are inspired to act by some goal a year from now that's just too far off, not present right now, and doesn't affect me in the moment. But that aside, rant aside, I would say
Mhm.
that
That's okay. I like your rant.
okay. The thinking goes as follows. Question 1, what is the single new behavior or habit I want my team to practice that'll make the biggest difference? Check. It might be following up with a customer in the 10 minutes after a meeting. Question 2 is, what do we need people to stop doing to give them the space to do that? The answer might be stop having hour-long meetings and make them 50 minutes. So you've got those 10 minutes to do the follow-up. And then question 3 is, how do we encode this new follow-up habit into the way that work is done? And we might have, here is our standard operating procedure. Meetings are 50 minutes long, and you automatically have 10 minutes booked for follow-up. There might be an accountability system built in, which is part of the social context. When I follow up, I copy my manager, so she knows that it's gotten done. There might be a mindset piece to it, which is the prevailing mindset is what makes me a rock star salesperson is hitting my number. The mindset shift might be what makes me phenomenal is following up with my customers in the 10 minutes following a meeting, because it'll send a signal of urgency and care. So you change mindsets, the behavior of people around you, including accountability buddies, as I call them,
Mhm.
the systems you operate under, and maybe even the space. Like put a sticker on your computer that says, have you followed up after this meeting? So that you don't have to think about practicing the habit. It's just the context that calls you into being. You walk into a library, you don't think about whispering, you just do it. It pulls the behavior out of you. The same with work. You can design even home offices to pull high performance habits out of salespeople, managers, and leaders.
Excellent. The you mentioned earlier the shift in leadership to telling stories and the ability to tell stories. So I want to shift gears and go to the storytelling piece of it, because so many leaders need to develop this skill. So can you talk more about that and what it means to be able to tell stories and the impact of telling stories?
One of my speaking coaches likes to say, people can argue with what you say, but they can't argue with how you make them feel.
Mm.
So that's a first clue, I would say. The second is to ask, like, what is leadership? In my view, it is having a vision for the future and the ability to inspire your team to take the right actions to create that future. So, what role does storytelling have to play in that? Firstly, there is no such thing as the future other than our view of what it might be or could be or we hope it to be. That is, in and of itself, a story. It's an invention. The more vivid your storytelling, the more clear the picture of the future becomes to your team. And the more evocative or emotional that story, the more excited they are to want to be and live in that future. Then it comes to, well, how do you get people to take the right actions? No one likes being told what to do. In fact, we often do exactly the opposite just to spite people, whether we're kids or adults.
Mhm.
The same is true. There's a wonderful quote that says, facts and figures only harden pre existing opinions, stories change minds. And leadership is often the art of having people change their mind about what they were going to do to now do what you would like them to do. And that is best done not by telling people what to do, not even by showing them, although storytelling does show them, but by allowing them to see for themselves what the right thing to do is. And a well told story brings people in and allows them to see themselves in the characters of the story. They leave the story feeling like they came up with the grand idea of what they had to do, and they forget that it was your story that inspired their action. So I don't know a more powerful leadership skill than storytelling to create a vision for the future, to inspire people to take the right actions, and to teach them what those actions are without telling them what to do. Stories preserve autonomy and agency, things that we know drive motivation.
A great example. Everyone should look at your TEDx talk, because you jump right into your TEDx talk telling this story about a trip you're taking with your son at the time. And it speaks to, well, it speaks to integrity. So you're telling the story about trust and integrity, but we're on that, you're taking us on this journey with you. And as the listener, as the viewer, it's sort of like we can see this coming, and we kind of know where you're going, but we're drawn into it, and we're like, oh, and it's powerful lessons through stories. How did you learn this?
Hmm. I was a public speaker for 20 years,
Mhm.
getting lots of feedback from the 3 or 4 people who would come and tell me they liked my talk, and nothing from the 500 who left in the back. And I grew frustrated about the question I would ask them, how could I get better? And no one had much good feedback. So I went on this global 1 year hunt for the world's best professional speakers. I didn't call them that at the time. And I found someone who, on our first call, I said, I'm a public speaker. I think I'm pretty good. And she said, let me stop you there. You're terrible. Like, excuse me? She said, you're a public speaker. Anyone can get up and talk in public. I'm a professional speaker and speaking coach. When you know the difference, you'll understand the difference. And boy, was she right. So I used to lecture people thinking that my job as a speaker and a leader is to tell people the stuff I know. I was putting them to sleep, or at best, leaving them feeling impressed by what I knew.
Mhm.
But no one cares. They want to be inspired about what they can do. And so I completely, through her coaching and others since then, transformed how I speak and lead from stories that contain facts like a Trojan horse, rather than lectures that tell people how smart you are and how dumb they are and what they need to do about it. No one loves that. So it's been a journey and a passion for mine, because I've seen just the power of storytelling to ignite this feeling in other people. If you can do it, I can do it. And what is leadership other than passing that confidence
Mhm.
from my journey to yours?
And you have an ability, everyone has an ability to tell a story. Everyone has told stories at various points in their lives, right? What do you say to those leaders who will say, "Oh, look, I'm just more of an introverted person," or I just want people to do their jobs and want to do their jobs and go home, and that's all we really need for them to do. I don't need to have a light or to what do you say to those leaders?
Yeah. That being a magnetic, charismatic leader doesn't mean that you need to be an extrovert, firstly. Secondly, extroversion and introversion are not traits, they're skills. So an introverted person can develop the skills of extroversion when needed. But no one loves an always on extrovert, and no one loves an always on introvert. Being able to judge what's required in the moment. But I would also say that hoping your team just does amazing work without being inspired and guided is using hope as a strategy. Good luck with that. And I would also say, I don't care who you are, with a little bit of coaching and a fair helping of practice, you can go from a horrific storyteller to being way better than good. And it's a little bit of structure, a little bit of technique. You can make extraordinary progress in days and weeks. It doesn't need to be a 10-year journey to being a phenomenal storyteller. And if an actuary who usually should be locked away from dealing with normal humans can learn how to tell stories, anybody can.
And what are all the different ways you work with people, whether it's the retreats, the group work, the individual work? What talk about the different ways you work with people and help businesses and leaders?
Well, I'm really lucky. I get to teach people at Kellogg, which is
Mhm.
one mode. In Habits at Work, we lead these high performance habits programs for corporations, their leaders, their managers, their salespeople, and others. And our flagship of the 7 high performance year-long programs we have is our Trust Advantage Leadership Cohort, because without trust, none of the other skills really matter. And then in Serenade, an executive experience business, I'm the lead facilitator, and those are much more philosophical, uh, experiential retreats for people who want to do the really deep work in reinventing themselves and uncovering the greatness behind their blind spots. So I would say that's the most sensual, fulfilling work I do. Habits at Work is very scaled work, and Kellogg is very academic work. So I get to have a mix of all of those.
How did you come to be have these different places and spaces?
Maybe a lack of focus, but also noticing what's possible and not. In academia, there isn't really an appreciation for skill development. It's an institution for knowledge transfer.
Yes.
Habits at Work is an institution for turning knowledge into skills and skills into habits, hence the name Habits at Work.
Mhm.
But there's a limit to the depth of work you can do in a corporate setting. So
Mhm.
ceremony is one layer deeper, where you really get to examine what makes me who I am, and therefore understanding that what might the recipe be for completely reinventing myself in 108 days. And sometimes people say, well, why would you bother? And the answer is you don't have to, but do you really want to die not having explored the 500 skills you might try out? And who knows which of them you'll love. And I've certainly had this experience that becoming a performance poet made me a better dad. Becoming a yoga teacher made me a better teacher. So every 108 days, our team develops one new skill. Some of them we keep and develop, some were just fun for a quarter. It's only a half an hour a day you have to invest. And why wouldn't you want to explore more of life?
A Aside from the obvious that it's incredibly good for brain health, right? And longevity. So there are physical and mental health benefits to doing exactly what you're describing. So many people get stuck and don't know how to get unstuck. And that's the kind of thing and I'm sure they talk to you, they talk to me, they get in a funk. They don't know how to get out of the funk, and it is a very purposeful way to do some digging and to get unstuck, um, and find something else beautiful in yourself that you might not otherwise tap into.
Yeah. And I'm sure as a coach, you see this, that the smarter someone is, the harder it is to get unstuck.
Yes.
Describe it as, someone's lying in a ditch and someone walks past and says, can I give you a hand up? And they say, no, I'm just going to think about the very best step I need to take out of this ditch. Come back later. And they keep saying
Yes.
no to these welcoming hands. And my response is, take the first hand that comes across, get out of the ditch, and then you can see what else is available. But sometimes we're so obsessed with making the next right move that we give up the opportunity to make any move
Any
and
move.
get out of the ditch.
Well, that's because, look at whether it's a kind of that classic type A that it has to be something very specific, and they'll know it when they see it versus I'll try this. What's the big deal? Like, I'll try this. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else. I can do anything for 90 days. I can do anything for a year. We obsess over it has to be just this one thing. I'll know it when I see it. How do I know if it just passed me?
Yeah. Or if it's hiding behind your blind spot. And by definition, we can't see behind our own blind spots.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So, what do you do when you aren't doing all of these things, Andrew?
I love to travel, explore the world. I'm at about 70 countries and counting, and I hope that I manage to see most, if not all, countries before I pass on from this earth. I have three beautiful children, identical twin girls, and a son who is more like me than I would like.
Oh,
So they keep me more than occupied. And as you noticed, I have a portfolio career that keeps me kind of busy.
it's exciting though, and what I appreciate about it is that you get to find yourself in different places and spaces. And so there's no monotony in anything you do. You get to be with different people, you're doing different things. You get to go on these journeys yourself. So there's always reinvention for you along the way too. And now you published a poetry book and you're doing performance poetry.
Yes, as someone who hated poetry as a kid, never saw myself writing poetry, let alone performing it or writing a book. That was one of the skills that on one of these Serenade experiences, one of the team we have an exercise where we ask each person to say about another person, this is what I trust you to do with your life. And one of my team said, Andrew, when you speak on stage, sometimes it sounds poetic. You should write poetry. I'll spare you my response. It wasn't kind. And she said, well, you're asking everyone else to try out new skills. Take your own medicine. And that began what became something I've fallen in love with, because it's so challenging compared to the work I do elsewhere. And as you say, it has introduced me to people who are from completely different walks of life. And I've found the more you do that, the less you're exposed to the social media bubble. And the less you're exposed to that bubble, the less us and them happens in the world. And
Mhm.
I, for one, want my kids to grow up in a world where they appreciate differences, not hold them against people.
That just made me I just needed to take a deep breath on that and soak it in for a minute. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I I want to ask what what advice would you have for yourself 25 years ago? If you look back, is there anything that you would say, "Hey, just make sure you try this or do this"? Not in the sense of regret or doing anything differently, but what would you nudge yourself to do or encourage yourself to do if you're just starting out again?
Yeah. There are a couple of candidates. An easy one is I would go back to when I was 21 and say, hire a coach, hire many, hire them
Mm,
all. In anything that you care to be good at, step one, hire a coach. Because so much of my life, and I think many people do this, we spend saying, well, when I get good enough, then I'll hire a coach, which is crazy because they can get you good enough faster. So that's
mhm,
one. The other would be I've done a lot of work, as I'm sure you have as a coach, in ontology, that what it means to humans to be a human being. And I'd encourage people to find some way to get to an answer. What
mhm.
actually makes human beings who we are? Because we're brought up in a culture that tells us a particular way. But if you grew up in a Zen household or a Buddhist household or a Christian household or a Jewish household, you have a very different view of what creates your identity. So I would advise my younger self to go and explore all of those views, not because I believe any one of them is right, but I think those different perspectives all give you new avenues for action. So those would be my
I I agree with you. I will vouch for that and say yes. And I've had conversations about this. I have a peer group of coaches that I've been meeting with from around the country for 6 years now. And we meet for just a couple of hours once a month and we share our issues and opportunities with each other. And we're just there for each other and and we coach each other. And we have discussed this very concept about the human experience and what it means to be human. And it- it's it's important and it's interesting and it opens the door for some deep thinking. And yes, I'll share with you when I started my business almost 11 years ago, I hired a coach and he knew I was brand new and was barely making I wasn't making any money really when I first started at all. And so he cut me such a deal on his hourly coaching rate. And I told my husband, I said, I hired a coach. And he said, what do you need a coach for? You know what you're doing. And I said, well, I might know the work, but I don't know what I don't know about what I'm doing. And so that's why I need a coach. So I like this is a whole new world for me and I don't know what I don't know and I need someone to talk to about all of this.
yeah.
And it
You
took, it took my husband a hot minute to catch up to the idea that like you're kidding me, right? I don't know anything about owning my own business and there's so much in this space. I don't know. And I know that I don't know. So, yeah,
yeah.
it's
Sounds
good
like you've
advice.
got a very fun coaching group. You're very lucky to have such a interesting group of people who can give you different perspectives. What a joy.
It's wonderful. I'm very lucky. Very, very fortunate. Yeah, thanks. Andrew, how can people find you if they want to learn more about one of your experiences or learn more about working with you? How can people find you?
Hmm. Thank you for asking. It's easy to find me on our websites. I have a couple. One is Habits at Work, HABITSATWORK.com. And my email is Andrew at Habits at Work. So easy to find me there. Serene is a little harder to find because it's CERENE.life. And I told you earlier, I don't know that I mentioned my passion for acronyms. You heard it in BRAT Lab.
Yeah.
CERENE is the Centers for Eudaimonic Research, Experimentation, Networking, and Education.
Okay.
Eudaimonia, as I'm sure you know, is Aristotle's idea of a fulfilled life through skill development in the service of others. So, hence the name. You can call it Serene if you prefer. We pronounce it Serene. And my
Okay.
professional speaking website is Andrew Sykes, SYKES.com. So, any of those.
Awesome. And there are, you can go to andrewsykes.com and watch multiple videos of Andrew. And I encourage you to do so because they're really good and you can see what he means by telling stories. You can see it in real time. So go check it out.
Thank you.
Um, Andrew, thank you so much for letting me go behind the curtain with you today. I really appreciate it. Really, really helpful advice for people here today. So grateful for you.
Well, back at you. It's one of my rare privileges in life to have interesting conversations with amazing, open people. So thank you for being a fantastic host.
Thank you. And I'm going on the record that when a spot opens up in one of your Serenade experiences, I'm in. So please let me know. I want to go reinvent something.
Wonderful.
So
Would love to have you.
send me the info. I want to sign up. Thank you so much. All right. And that's another episode of Leadership Backstage. Until the next one. Thanks for listening, everyone. You have the insight. The next move is yours. Because influence without action doesn't create impact. If this was valuable, please give it a like, a follow, and share it with someone else doing the work. I'm Claudia Williams, and this is From Pumps to Power Moves. Now go take ownership of what's next.
Hi, and welcome to another episode.